The stairs to where? Step 1. Soul turned into a field she didn't know was there and disappeared into the tall corn. She jumped, feeling the warm air pass through her, believing the world had only existed since she had been born.
Private thoughts took her feet by furrows to a clearing. Here, Soul stood and stared at the stairs to where? The stairs, as thin as the corn that had hidden them, rose into the sky. Rusted, they hung onto the breeze, an elegant lacework where shadows kissed Soul's toes. She stepped onto them. Such a small distance from the ground, Soul sat and traced her fingers along the iron lacework until she found a chain. Well over 100 years before, a stained hand worked at the press. It was the hand of Soul's great-grandfather. At the press, he was a young man, new to marriage, new to home. Full of love, the work he sung, his hammer light, he caressed the forge of its warm offerings. This young man walked from his home, stained his hands, sung to his wife, and talked the refrain of the village's bellows. He pressed blades. Each one took a day to be stretched and strained. He traced his fingers the length of their waist, feeling for the lace of life. Soul's great-great-grandfather loved his wife and gave the waking hours of his life to her and their beloved to come. Corn-woven angels conjured the forge and protected the cradle, as each day the blades were fetched and chained together. Each week the chained, bladed bundles were fetched and trundled, together with loving work of others. Such audience of ages, of days of blades, revealed frocks of militarian cages. They hung in the morning sun, sweet Nancies and iron maidens, lamenting the lace of life. Hooded in service, carrion perches, and prisons of those undone.
A wardrobe of carcasses, silently waiting for a reason to justify their creation.
Soul's great-great-grandfather spent his life caressing the lace of his wife and chasing the cold with a stained hand. Soul sat on the first step of the stairs to where? Lifted the chain, looping it round her wrist. To her delight, from the shade, rose a cage much larger than her hand.
Cages are made as gauges, and they eat a cruel food. From somewhere deep inside, Soul waited on her perch for food. From a house burrow, collecting the furrows, meandered a solitary corn mouse, oblivious to its presence on stage. Deftly, Soul stole the furrow's freedom from the sky. The burrower swung in a cage, hung on a chain, in the hand of Soul.
She slipped her feet to the ground and skipped from the field hole, full of the sky.
It took a week for the prisoner to die. It took another to cry, and a third to invent a lie. Soul didn't know why such an evil construction, made with the purpose of destructing connections, hung in the wardrobe next to her collection of corn angels. Step 2. When Soul felt better, she once again turned into the field, finding the air dancing to the clatter of ripening seed pods, heavy on the head of the corn. Coming to the stairs, she stretched the long reach to the second step, taking in the plant commotion below, clapping and tip-tapping on the stairs, to the rattling chorus of corn, waves her palm rested on, fingers twiddled with a pair of round lenses. In query and delight, she discovered such treasure.
Over 90 years before, a pair of cracked lips drew in, cooked, sand-soaked air which sauntered over the foundry. These were the lips that pronounced the infamous smile of Sol's great aunt. The lady of a foreign land was old, after spending all her years doting on her only brother since they had been rescued. She had won many a family medal for patience at opening presents. Indeed, her pinpointed observance of the fine things in life is what had made her polish so proficiently in the glassworks. Her secret places were stashed with unopened presents, and her reflective fingertips left no print on their papery cases. Sol's great aunt polished 2 pools of glass a day with tenderness and foreign affection into lenses. 2 a day, 10 a week were collected and paired for staring at the enemy.
Those hiding were divided from surviving. Those hidden from inspection were led upon by insurrection from the power of the magnified gaze. Those bathing in hazes were set ablaze as their profiles drifted into focus.
Presents were left unopened, as the enemy never escaped the secret watching. Sol's great aunt gave the end of her days protecting her brother and keeping her lips from kissing another.
Sol sat, her legs swinging, on the second step of the stairs to where, and raised the small binoculars to her eyes. She then lost an hour, revelling in a path of sleuthness previously unimaginable.
She spied on everything, including the horse and the recently divorced Mr. Inspector. She stalked the rider and found inside her a fear of his amorous inflections. It took a week of secret looking, then one of hiding the cooking, to result in the rider's demise. A third week then followed, as Sol cooked her books, while the divorcee was unhooked from the trays. Sol couldn't explain the poisonous equine grain, which buried the lens inside an unopened present, covered in fingerprints.
Step 3. After the days became longer, Sol cut her hair and found herself drawn back to the stair. The field was equally sawn, and crisp and stalk dresses stood ready to dance. Their waist was pulled tight and full of expectation that they would be swept off their hidden feet. The girl rose above the shaved surroundings in 3 bounds to the 3rd step.
An aroma dragging her breath to remain still, Sol clung to her will. Intoxicated, she took her rest, fingers bereft at the loss of hair to bless. Instead, they found their caressing at the petals of flowers, as the pollen had arrested her development moments before. Over 60 years before, a red-faced perfumer caressed the blooms of mustard, proficient in pungency, the rouge and aroma injustices. Sol's grandfather took his daily walk of the gardens. Blessed with a moustache, he would grasp at the blooms, gathering the scent to his hairy nostrils. He recalled his wife's, the prophet of hives, and cared not for his numerous offspring. A new buttonhole each day, a new spray in his grasp each week to market. A new queen every May for the workers to obey. In his garden, Sol's grandfather was safe and never got stung, as long as he pruned with affection.
The most beautiful crop from which he caught every seed that was dropped was the mustard. The ministry called at his gate and took 3 top hatfuls to weigh alongside the accumulated collection from the congregation every day of rest. The gas sinks.
It searches for the silent spaces that try so hard to keep apart the offending and opposing breath. The words of trust and commitment, the lips of promises and suggestion. All these pockets of kissing, the gas entered in vows of death.
The trenches and furrows held men which ran through them like mice, burrowing in feckless actions of agreement, casting their masks and top hats off to the ministry.
Sol recalled how the priest had condemned her and how a book that he roasted kept her from resting whilst kingdoms of heavens were exchanged for grains of mustard.
It took a whole day of rest to collect a wedding hat full of seeds.
Another spent on her knees, repenting near the ventilation.
The third watching until the vestry bird fell from its perch. Acts of ungodly vice were flung at the devil's mice for choosing such a burrow to store their plunder.
Soul was asunder and thrice denied as to why a ministry gas safety guide resided in her Bible, claiming it was a marker for a story about a grain of mustard, and she was never stung by bees. Step 4. Not until a new ordained dinosaur reigned on the perch and a saintly feline lurched between the vestments did Soul scurry back to the field. There, in the red sunset, rose the stairs to where.
Whilst trying to discover how, with the workings of a plough, the earth lay full of trenches, the young girl crossed the shadowed flight of a moth on the floor.
Caught in delight, she climbed the 4 flights to find the evening flapper, and there she raised her skirt in giant wings to flirt with the strapping, dapper aeronaut. Their shadows swept out across the field as the harvest sun set. Over 30 harvests before, a pair of long painted legs silhouetted against a door waited to clock out as the evening night faded. The longfish netted poplars were rooted in high-strapped calipers that kept them from cracking in the wind. Lusher covered the bruises and the toenails shone like bright red bullets. The shadow that left the factory gates was that of Soul's distant cousin, once or twice removed. The factory made brushes, and Soul's distant cousin, once or twice removed, was as persistent in the art of makeup as she was resistant in her heart because of her illnesses. Whilst clocked in, this distant cousin, once or twice removed, combed the hairs of each brush head as the machines tied them in glue.
When clocked out, this distant cousin combed her hair, whilst sat on her stair, reading of the brave resistant.
The brushes were boxed by the 100 and stacked by the 1,000, shunted and tracked until they confronted lacquering the wings of the pilots with camouflage. The disguised fuselages took full advantage, and their sweeping shadows brought harrowing scores as bright red bullets left their outstretched skirts.
Soul's distant cousin, once or twice removed, caught many that resisted in her camouflage netting and her blushing skills. Though not raising the dead, made them look presentable in their coffins.
As the moth tried to fly to the moon, Soul fluttered home and painted her toenails red. From the clutter of the shed she found paintbrushes, netting and a lamp. She'd learned about factories and the making of pins, and she set her alarm clock so that she knew when to begin. Though they resisted, moths flocked to the light, and Soul brushed at their wings, collecting their flying ointment.
3 weeks went by as she studied how to fly and painted her skirt with moth camouflage. Another 3 months were stamped on her memory as she remained clamped in the hospital, thinking of the cemetery. She knew not the least of why thousands of beasts had feasted on all in her wardrobe.
Then, without of the strapping, she put her face in the hedge to hide, and pledged in her inherited makeup box that she didn't know why she fell from the attic window ledge.
But she insisted on painting her toenails as they poked out of the plastered trunks. Step 5. After exercises on stretching, Sol found herself fetching souvenirs back in the field. The furrows were dusted with snow, and she stuck her tongue to the stairs to wear. As she waited to thaw, she listened to the craw of larks back from their foreign wending.
A couple, in love, descended from above and began to make their nest. On step number 5, 2 parents did their best to contrive how to support a clutch of eggs, whilst Sol mimicked and strived to keep her brood alive by collecting and weaving at home. The birds lost their fear as Sol drew nearer, until she shared the lofty residence by day and practised being broody by night. Sol's dreams cracked open each night. Sometimes the contents scurried out of sight. Sometimes the incubated turned to fight. But mostly inside was another dream waiting to hatch.
As upstairs she nested, downstairs her mother protested at the size of her belly, whilst her father requested to have his sentence reduced. Sol's father had spent his life caring. He had spent his life wearing his heart on his 2 sleeves, only to land on both knees, pleading not to be taken from the family.
Hearts faded to tears as the sentence in years was wrung out. He turned from his wife and started to climb the stairs, his reason and purpose for life receding with each step.
From then, each month, he had written to his daughter, and each time he thought of her close by his side, sat on each of those steps. He remembered the stairs as they cut off his hair and took him from cage to cage.
He conjured the view from a pirate's telescope eye as they watched him day and night.
He penned how he dreamt of the flowers outside his window, till only his fingerprints told of the camouflage painting of model aeroplanes which hung from his solitary cell.
The final letter he wrote, they found as they released his throat, as it fluttered from the top step through the air. He confessed to suggesting, requesting and investing in shells both fragile and dangerous. He recalled how he'd secretly made, covertly paid and surreptitiously laid them together, side by side. He'd invested much in that deathly clutch, stretching from inheritance to religion, protecting what he thought was right from others that might change his beliefs. His fears disappeared with his remaining years as the explosion took hold. His final request was to lay him to rest in the place where the larks nested. Sol's brother entered the world as she delicately held the first of the lofty hatchlings.
As her brother became slowly able to rest alone in his cradle, Sol read him letters.
They told of love and caring, wonder and daring, and the view from the top of the stairs to where